Rockstar nowadays are a tried and true giant in the gaming industry, known predominantly for their GTA series. But earlier on in the late 90s and the early 2000s, Rockstar were a growing and rising name. Their first two GTA titles were rough, but laid the groundwork for everything else to come, especially for the 3D revolution. For most people's memories, GTA 3 was their first, becoming a huge success, and it paved the way for future open world titles, as well as superior entries like Vice City and San Andreas. But GTA 3 wasn't the first 3D game they were involved with, because during the launch of the PS2, along with the wave of titles to spearhead its sales, Rockstar's efforts at bringing a racing series to life would come in the guise of a game called Midnight Club Street Racing. At this time, however, Rockstar hadn't begun developing their own games. They would hire out a studio to help them build the game they had in mind. Midnight Club was to be a series to rival Need for Speed, an arcade giant with little to no competition at this juncture. It was to mirror the JDM scene of the 90s and 2000s that had skyrocketed at this point, and had become huge in the car culture. The intro would show what was to be expected: highly tuned cars on familiar streets, with cops on your tail, all in the pitch of night. In retrospect, it doesn't translate that well now, but the core concept was well thought out at the time, and the studio they picked out were up for the task: Angel Studios, the makers of the Midtown Madness series. So for those that are familiar with it, Midnight Club will also have a similar vibe. It starts you off right in the heart of New York, as a cab driver that gets insulted by a local racer of the Midnight Club. Having none of it, of course, you challenge him to a race. You follow him, the race begins, and surprisingly, you win. And then he invites you to what he calls the Midnight Club, a group of racers who drive a wide range of different vehicles in the night, each with their own speed and handling. And this becomes pretty much the goal. You cruise around the city, tail the racer, you race them, beat them, they give you their number, and then you can challenge them to a head-to-head race, and if you win, you get their car. And that's pretty much the gist of the entire game and your only means of progression. Depending on your skill and experience with racing games, it could take you up to a day or two to complete the whole game, which is stretched across two cities, New York and London. For a 2000s game, they're pretty well made. Most, if not all, the landmarks happen to have made it into this game. Something that I've always appreciated about this series, the attention to detail with bringing real-life worlds and cities into video game form. New York with its dense traffic but wide spaces, and London with its endless alleyways, shortcuts and off-roading opportunities. They each give the individual cars different results. Some perform better than others, especially the slower cars in New York and the faster cars in London. The cars of the first Midnight Club showcase a variety of different models, each with their own handling, acceleration, and top speed. The game's progression hinges on your collection of obtaining faster vehicles, so that you have a fighting chance against the more difficult rivals later on. For a racing game, the first Midnight Club is quite hard, but upon playing it again, it's more as a result of its horrendous handling and car physics. Probably some of the worst I've ever seen in a game. The fastest cars that you get your hands on later tend to handle the worst, with an insane amount of grip, too much angling with even the slightest touch of the analog stick, and its poor reaction to dynamic terrain, which, in contrast to the slower vehicles, are generally easier to handle even on off-road scenarios. Especially off-road, where it goes all over the place when you have a faster vehicle. Hitting traffic or literally anything else, like objects like poles, streetlights, whatever, is suicidal. Hitting just about one pole, or any kind of pole like that, it took me to a whole different clock in one session. I'm not even joking, so take it from me. Never ever hit anything in this game, or at least try not to. It's pretty much the worst part about the game. The handling, car physics, even for a 2000s game, it does not hold up very well. But through thick and thin, I did manage to beat it eventually, despite all the frustrations that I had experienced. Customization is very limited. You have only a selection of colors, followed by changing the saturation and the brightness of it. You can, however, get variations of each car, one being an improvement after the other, but in order to get them, you have to race the same rival head-to-head 2 more times, each time getting another variant of their car. In the arcade mode, there are also other bonus cars available, like the variants for the taxi, the police cars, the bus, etc. But for the career mode, you will be limited to the cars that you obtain through the rivals. When you beat the final opponent of the game, you're thrust out of the career mode and are left to just modes in the arcade section. You have the cruise mode where you can go through New York and London, and you can set conditions that are also available in the other modes, like waypoint, head-to-head, and also capture the flag, which is quite fun actually, and something that should have been implemented in the career mode. As for how the races are structured, I really like the open-ended feel that they decided to go for. In Need for Speed, or other arcade racing games, you're generally in a linear race where you can't go anywhere else. But in Midnight Club, you have the entire map open to you, and initially it can be difficult and confusing, but some races are more straightforward, and over time you'll be able to calculate which is the best direction to go in to get ahead of your opponents. In the context of street racing, this format makes the most sense because street racing in itself is dependent on your knowledge of the place, where the best routes are, the shortcuts and the corners that give you more distance from your opponents or towards them. The game also incorporates cops, but in a very limited capacity. The most you'll have on a screen is 2, and even then you can outrun them most of the time. But it does make the races somewhat more interesting at least, but if you want more dynamic pursuits in races, then play Need for Speed High Stakes, Hot Pursuit 2, or Most Wanted instead. They do them much better. The rivals themselves have different personalities and backgrounds, and I like the cartoony look they have going for them. It actually looks better than the actual game itself, funny enough. But there aren't that many of them, and I feel like they could have made this game a lot bigger if they had more time. In retrospect, it's a very rough product, but it was a starting point for Rockstar's attempt at the racing genre as well as 3D gaming. It was also a title that helped sell PS2 copies and made it a popular platform, was also the highest selling game in the Midnight Club series, and would set the blueprint for Midnight Club 2, a game that does everything that this game does, but better. To be honest with you, Midnight Club Street Racing is not really a game I would recommend. The nostalgic aspect was something I enjoyed the most because I got to revisit a small part of my childhood, revisiting old memories and stuff. But looking at it now as an adult, it's a game that is so outdated and honestly inferior even for 2000 standards. I cannot recommend this game. I would ask that you move on to Midnight Club 2 instead. It is so much better. The only reason that I would suggest you revisit this game or just have a try of it for the first time is if you're in it for the historical aspect, if you just want to see how the series got started. Otherwise, I would avoid this game personally. Thank you for watching.